Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 37 of my Industrial Revolution 3 playthrough. In this episode, we are going to start liquefying our gases so we can start making use of the fossil gas mine that we have, and also start making some nanoglass. Enjoy. And we need to pipe this coal in. Oop, one more miner's done. And one thing we do need to do is make a whole nother set of these, which might be kind of messy because of the position of this power pole, which does have a wire that we're trying to reuse. We could pick this whole thing up and try to scoot it over a little bit, but I'm not sure if I want to. Sounds like a lot of work. So to get more output, we can just kind of squeeze it in here. And there we go. It's kind of super messy to get it in here, but we can by pushing it in there. So that should get everything covered. So now we have doubled our power output from coal, and we need to expand our power options. But before that, let's do some research. It would be nice to finish up with these previous tier items. A big one we can do is cryogenics, which allows us to liquefy and gasify various items. First, we have the cryogenic plant, which is just a steel item, as well as heat sinks, which is something we still need copper for. So that's something to keep in mind. But this machine will cool down gases into liquids and separate them if required. And then there's the ambient heat exchanger, which reverses the process and turns liquids into gases, but it uses the ambient temperature to do so, so it does not require any energy. And then you get all of these recipes. First, we can separate the compressed air into a tiny bit of helium, some oxygen, and lots of nitrogen. And then they have this mirrored recipe here that essentially looks the same on the outside, but what it actually changes, and this is pretty genius, is the position of the pipes on the machine. So you can do some different kinds of setups, because essentially you can move pipes around rather than having to do pipeception. Also, if you just want the oxygen, nitrogen, or helium, there's recipes for that, and this saves you the annoyance of having to vent the other items and just gives you the one you want. And none of those will create pollution if you vent them, so it doesn't really break anything to just go for the thing you want if you just really don't care about those others. And now we have access to the liquefations. So you can take anything in gas form and turn it into liquid. And similar to how the ingot stacking works, this is a 4-to-1 ratio. So you can quadruple the throughput of a pipe by turning it liquid first before you send it down. So essentially anything that can be liquefied probably should be, just in order to avoid pipe throughput issues. So you can liquefy oxygen, and then there's a recipe where you heat it back up into gas form. You can do it with nitrogen, you can do it with hydrogen, you can do it with helium, you can do it with natural gas, you can do it with carbon dioxide, and then the ambient heat exchanger gives us some interesting options where we can turn steam back into water, if that's something that we want to do, and you can turn the polluted steam into polluted water, which is also interesting, that this will essentially turn one of those polluted steam derricks, instead of making power, it'll just make a ton of polluted water, which you can then get sulfur from. And finally, kind of the thing that we're here for right now, is fossil gas separation. So that fossil gas mine creates fossil gas, and in order to separate it, similar to with the compressed air, you take the air and you cool it down into liquid form, which then allows the liquids to separate, and then you can use them as required. So if you do that with fossil gas, you'll mostly get natural gas, and you'll get a little bit of nitrogen and a little bit of helium. So it's similar to the air separation, but that liquid oxygen is replaced with a whole bunch of natural gas. And that natural gas is just something that you can burn or turn into plastic or whatever you need to do to it. And then there's the reversed recipe as well. And also, if you just want the natural gas and you don't care about those other ones, this recipe will vent the clean gases and just save the fuel for you. And of course, with these recipes, after you turn something liquid, you're probably going to need it in gas form again, and then you're going to have to change those around. So like with the natural gas, we need to turn it into gas form before you can actually put it into our factory. So we'll hit that, And we're actually going to keep this going here because we want to get down to the point where we can make these high pressure canisters here, which can then store a very large amount of liquids. They all basically work as you would expect, although the special one is the liquid natural gas, which will give you 128 megajoules. And also it matches the performance of those better batteries that we chose not to use. But there's some prerequisites to get here. And all of this stuff was previous tier technology stuff. It's just we weren't really in a position to do anything with it quite yet. But now we are a little more stable in that we'll be able to produce diamonds and rubies as required. So let's do lasers, which is a red circuit item, and a ruby rod. And that ruby rod is just ruby and gold foil. And so soon, after getting Automation 3, we now have Automation 4. To get the laser assembler, it's a very special type of assembler, and it's actually built from the advanced assembler, so we'll cover it later. But you need advanced rotors and pulse lasers in there, and this will unlock high-speed recipes to make green and red circuits. That basically requires a little bit of liquid nitrogen, and then it comes out as regular nitrogen. And you don't actually consume any of it because you see the liquid part is 1/4 the size of the output. So you're really just borrowing the nitrogen. And this is an optional process for green and red circuits. However, it is required for blue circuits. So you can't really put this off forever, but don't feel like you have to upgrade your factory just to upgrade these circuits. However, we do need the laser assembler. So that's why we have to research it. And then we'll keep it going because after that, we'll need graphene. And you can see the little laser icon saying that this is a laser assembler recipe. That to make graphene requires a plastic bar with helium in gas form and nitrogen in liquid form. And then the output is 2 graphene, as well as both the helium and nitrogen in gas form, and none of it was actually consumed in this process. And then we can make nanoglass from 2 graphene and a regular glass. And again, the nitrogen is not consumed, it is just borrowed for the process. And then we get to high pressure canisters, which I already explained. This barreling machine looks like it's essentially the same. And then the canister is nanoglass and reinforced steel plates. So we do that. And then finally, after everything, we get to high octane fuel. And this is an interesting one. First of all, it gives you the high octane fuel canister, which is 144 megajoules inside of it. So it's a little bit higher than the natural gas. However, the big one is that this is very much for vehicles in that it's 180% acceleration and 115% top speed. So way more acceleration and still a little higher top speed compared to natural gas. However, what's interesting about it is that the high octane fuel, if you decide to burn it, has 600 kilojoules in it, whereas the components that went into it are only 400 kilojoules. And since 120 units went in and 120 came out, that's a 50% increase to the amount of energy that's in this fuel if you were specifically burning it. However, we're just now switching away from making power from oil, so we're probably not going to do a lot of it. It is important to note that you need both of these to make this high octane fuel. You can make ethanol from petroleum, but you can't make petroleum from ethanol. And petroleum is an oil product. We now have access to fossil gas, but that makes liquid natural gas, which is further down the chain than the petroleum is. So the only way you can make high octane fuel is from mining oil. You can offset it by using that ethanol from trees or other sources, so you're going to need to be careful with how you set it up. And there are ways, but for now we'll hit that, and then we have lots of research going. Might as well do another research while we're at it. How about let's really crank up our robot speed. It's also interesting that the robot speed and the batteries do not go up linearly. So they do discharge faster over time compared to how much their speed increases. Now this is probably going to trash our electrical network. We'll certainly have enough fuel for it. However, we still need to set up the actual power plant. Somewhere around there, and looks like we don't have any storage space, so... Well, I guess they found it. It's kind of weird though, I'm not sure where they're going. I want to make sure they're not doing anything dumb. Ah, they're putting them in there. Well, we'll put that right there for now to give them somewhere to go. And we'll put a second one here. Looks like it doesn't quite fit because of Roboport, but we can actually still get it in here just fine. Also, one other thing I did with the airships is add extra stops for all of the individual ore washers, which saved us having a huge belt that came down here. Now it just comes through here as additional stops because it really doesn't produce this stuff all that fast. You see every trip, it really only leaves a few items. So this one airship can go to each area that cleans polluted water and pick up the items. Everything should be upgraded. The wires should be good. Lots of junk to move around. Well, while we're waiting on all of that, we probably should get started on these diamonds and rubies. So to make the ruby, we need silicon, chromium, and ruby powder, which comes from the rubies. So to make the diamonds, we need diamond powder and graphite. And the machine that makes all of this is the cubic press, which requires lots of chromed items, but also advanced engines, and I don't think we're actually doing that yet. And most specifically, we need an advanced crusher because that's the only machine that can actually crush these down. So we captured enough diamonds to make one of those. Looks like we are relatively short on green circuits. We certainly could stand to upgrade the output. Not that it matters too much. Our research is plenty fast, but it looks like the thing that's actually short are all these glass machines, and we certainly could build something bigger than that, but for now, it's basically sufficient. So we need some advanced engines. I'm assuming this is something we're going to want to have in our inventory, and it looks like it. Advanced drills, steam turbines, centrifuges, definitely things we'd make a lot of. So we're going to need to make some engines, and it's actually quite similar to the standard combustion engine, except it requires lubricant now. Do we have brass yet? Actually, no. That is something we need to send up. Oh, and this reminds me that the rest of those belts were never connected, which would have helped. Okay, everything's here. So now that they have filter inserters, they'll only pick up the correct item for their stacker. Okay, keep the lubricant going, and great, it jumps over everything. And I guess we need to figure out a plan here. Let's do a new line. Say our goal is diamonds. Not sure if this is going to work. With the matrix solver, let's push it down a row just to make sure that there's no issues. Because the problem is this takes diamonds to make diamonds. There we go. It's basically working. Where we type in 1 diamond and we only get half of it because it takes half of a diamond to make one. And luckily the matrix solver actually works here. So if we want 1 diamond a second, it's going to take 32 cubic presses and this 1 crusher. And is that appropriate? Well, it depends on how much graphite we have. We have a decent amount of it, but not a ton. 12.5. So going for 20 sounds like a lot. So in fact, doing half a diamond a second seems pretty reasonable. So we have a plan here. We definitely need more diamonds before we can do more crushers. And we need to make these cubic presses. Is that something we want to handcraft or automate? It is kind of obnoxious with all those reinforced chrome plates. The main thing it would require are advanced computers, and that's not really something we're making up here. So I'm thinking actually handcrafting these probably makes the most sense, at least for now, because I don't know how many of these we're actually going to be making. So we need to make this somewhere, and running very low on all of our tin. In fact, we have 14 minutes left of it, but that's fine because we've got another close tin patch right here that we basically can just run a belt for. Might as well throw it on the list now. And this area seems pretty good. To make the diamonds, it needs to be where the graphite is, which is around here. So the graphite spins around here, and any diamonds that are made would go on this belt to get pulled in. And that's all we got. It's a very quiet machines here, but it should get going before too long. Of course, our coal mine is getting very small. And while that's going, we can calculate the same for rubies. So we have to push this down. Our goal is 1, so we'll type in 1 there to set that as the product. So once we do so, we can add the powder. That's the confusing thing about this, is that if you don't type a number in here, if it's just 0, well, it says that star there now because I already typed. If it's just 0, and you try to put something on, everything's just going to be 0. But if you type a number in first, then it goes down, and the matrix solver will work. Could we do 10 chromium a second? That's actually possible, considering 15 is the output here. But for now, let's just make it the same size as the other setup, just so we can copy it. So it will require some silica, which is made from stone. And I guess, actually, we could use the advanced crushers for this. Why not? And that's the setup. Looks like we're basically collecting enough diamonds here. For now, we'll just manually deliver them to our inventory. And we definitely want a copy of that. And actually, we probably don't need the crushers at all because we can just use the leftovers from our landfill setup, which honestly we don't need very much of. However, we do need to awkwardly get this chromium. I think that'll do it. Basically, I'm trying to set this up so it can full flow, both splitting resources apart and putting any extras back into the system. It won't produce them very reliably, but it also doesn't have to, because simply we don't need very much of this. Well, making lots of power, and probably, yep, lots of pollution, and it's hurting the trees. Well, that research is done. There's no reason to stop here. Let's increase robot cargo capacity and make our flammables better. So plopping this in here where it makes sense, something like this, but keeping in mind it actually has 3 inputs. And in come the silica. And there's the rubies. Although, we actually need to have an inserter here. So there you go. And those will all get fired up before too long. So let's make our request for rubies. So now at least we can handcraft anything that needs rubies or diamonds, and we'll go from there. So what haven't we touched in a while? Well, we have the laser assemblers, the heat exchanger. That would be pretty nice to gather up that fossil gas. However, we have unlocked the ability to make the high octane fuel, and we can do that right now. We can't put it into the vehicles until we make the better containers, but we still can make the fuel, especially because we're in a situation where we are high on petroleum. So essentially, we would want to use this exact same logic, but instead of turning the petroleum into the natural gas, we would want to send it down the line to make the high octane fuel. So in this situation, we actually don't need to have any of those, although we do want to copy the logic for them. I'll leave the combinator there even though it's technically not required. That this is just looking for a green circle, which the only reason this would run is if we are low on ethanol. Of course, that's going to clog everything up. But now we need to figure out how much are we actually going to have here to potentially process. And it looks like if everything was sent down to petroleum, it would be 166, although realistically we wouldn't need that much. That is what it would be. I suppose it would be like this if we were specifically making all of this natural gas. So that is a number to go by. Let's just do a new line. So it's high octane fuel. Let's switch it to input. We have to knock it down so we can actually change this to 166. There we go. It's actually not too many plants really, and that will require some ethanol, which will come from the rest of the factory. Could we produce 50 a second? Oh yes, easily. And I kind of want to keep it in line, which means lots of landfill here. I guess we'll just do 10 of them, because that makes things easy. And we need the logic now to control the flow of resources, and I guess we'll just control it based on the petroleum, since that's what we did before. So the concept here is the same. This is our new dump, that if we find ourselves low on light oil, heavy oil, or natural gas, then give a green circle. And we don't need to worry about ethanol, because the natural gas will turn into that. And then this also requires that petroleum be too high, and if it is, it will send the signal through. And if any of these circles are green, the pump will turn on. So the ethanol will always go in there, and we will want a storage tank similar to the rest of these. Probably should have put a little bit more space in there, but oh well. I guess we could get our extra space by simply putting this down here somewhere. Let's put this wire down here so we can hook it up to circuit HUD. I would like to see this in operation, and we're going to kind of have to wait a while for all these oils to work their way down. Well, in the meantime, how about we do a new railroad track all the way up there to get that fossil gas. Oh, looks like we ran out of tin though, which is another belt cleaned out of the factory. And I guess this belt can basically go straight up. Well, we have been silently but quickly making tons of science packs. And because we're running so low on sulfur, we probably want to grab this sour gas too. But do we use one train for that? or two separate ones? Probably two separate trains. I mean, sour gas is kind of important, but also it doesn't really matter right now, because we're essentially just turning it into explosives for ammo. So it's actually not all that big a deal. So we'd use the same single track as everything else. It has been working up until now. Let's just drive it back manually for now, because we need a new unloading station, and there should be room in here for that. It'd be great if we can fit two of these in here. There we go. We have awkwardly placed everything in here. Barely. So that's fossil gas unload. And sour gas unload. Let's see if it can do the full trip. Definitely has a long way to go, but it can manage just fine. Fortunately, it doesn't look like the train is painting itself, which is a little annoying, but nonetheless, we have our fossil gas now. Still waiting on making this high-octane fuel. We just simply haven't been overloaded on any particular resource because we've been consuming natural gas to make the ethanol. The goal is to separate this away. Let's push it down so we can set the input instead. And yeah, we wanted somewhere around 120 a second, which actually does not require that many plants, just two of them. We will want to store the nitrogen and helium in liquid form. Natural gas we could store in liquid form, and we certainly send it around the factory. But the problem is that a lot of the places that it goes, it potentially could pass straight through. So does it actually pass through anything? It kind of does here. Wow, that's a terrible zigzag. But we could actually switch this over to be in liquid form. So let's actually plan around that. But anyway, this is all we would need to do. The machine is pretty fast. It does require those heat sinks. And are we going to need enough of these to care? Well, they actually go into the revolutionary computers, but otherwise not really. Those heat sinks are quite difficult to make, so I might regret that already. And let's move the cryogenic storage to this new machine and essentially take it out of this one. And the only other thing that would create our natural gas is as a byproduct of making space through this. So you see you have the machine here. It has an input on one side and then three outputs. And if you wanted to do something cool, you could reverse the recipe here so they both line up on this side. It's up to you. And that does look cleaner, so we might as well. These will always run because they are free resources. And we need 3 tanks of storage. Of course, we want all this connected, but now that I think about it, I kind of want these signals to be on a different wire because we're starting to get a lot of red signals here. So I'm wondering instead if we should put the chemicals on the green wire and the petrochemicals on the red. Yeah, maybe I should be making these heat sinks after all. Luckily, it's only a copper item, which means we can make it on our bus and we can do it anywhere. So we'll grab 100 of these, and that makes these a lot faster to handcraft. Basically, we need to figure out how many of these are going to need to process the entire output into the liquid form here. That process is 50 a second, and our oil plan creates 80. So honestly, having like 2 of them ought to be pretty effective. The entire factory might come to a halt while we do this, but we need to get all of that natural gas and send it back in here. And it is being sent in. And there they go. Liquid natural gassing away. So the way we get the extra signal is just put it on the same thing there. Okay. Although this specific one should actually be red. That's cool that it has the temperature of negative 150. And we're not going to use this other tank right here to store stuff anymore. So we're going to pump it out of there. How's it doing with the rest of this? Looks like it drained it pretty well. It is still kind of running a little bit. You can see how much more dense it is in liquid form. You can hold a lot of it. It's time for the fossil gas now. So there we go. We'll slam it in there, and this will always run. And now we've got our new chemicals in there. We are about at the point where we're going to be sending a lot of carbon dioxide around the factory in order to grow trees. And we might as well use this space to store the carbon dioxide too. Okay, that tank is empty, so we don't need it anymore. And for now, that one's done with the pumping. And who knows about the rate, but we'll just use 2 machines again, put them down here. And since we pretty much always want to compress it, there won't be any logic attached to it. And there we go, a new chemical. We'll pump that tank dry now. Let's throw some other relevant chemicals on the green wire, such as sulfuric acid. And we should probably put hydrogen on here. I don't think we need to worry about liquefying it right now, simply because it's not actually going on any pipes. So that tank is empty. We'll let the rest of it just flow on its way. And once natural gas gets above 80%, then we'll actually need to have some logic to consume it, because turning it back is actually a lot easier. And it looks like it does not require any recipes. Let's make 2 of them for now. We're actually making this natural gas pretty fast. So now it gets pushed in to make ethanol, and that goes down the chain. So how fast do these actually go? 625, whereas these go much faster than that. So let's go with another 6 of them. It's nice they don't use any power. And that's making room. Ah yes, this is trying to turn this on if natural gas is low, but it actually doesn't use that signal anymore. And I'm guessing it'll probably never be the case because of our liquid natural gas here, but in a way we kind of need a buffer tank for the natural gas in here, so I want to have a space there. Just have that in there so we can watch it and see what it does. And because that number is 1/10 the size, we need to drop that to 500. So the logic works. Anyway, now we need to send it through. And how much do all of these use? Actually, not much at all. And just doing them in groups of 4 probably makes sense. So we'll simplify this a little bit. Less zigzag. Less potential for throughput issues. And then basically we'll just have to do this now. Anytime we have our natural gas or anything else that we might want to consume, we just have to send it through some heat exchangers first in order to turn it into the gas again. And one more in line there, just to fill that up. And it takes a little while to get those balanced out, but they're getting there. And hopefully I got them all. We're certainly going through the fossil gas faster than we're bringing it. So we needed nitrogen in order to make the nanoglass, and both helium and nitrogen to make the graphene, and also the faster assemblers, and also we could potentially make circuits faster too. Now if we look at the recipe, it's 1 second to make 1, and then it's 1 second to make 2. So basically it doubles the speed. And how much of this are we going to need? Well, I guess it depends on if we need graphene or nanoglass. The graphene goes into certainly a couple of things, mainly the nanoglass, and that does go into the revolutionary circuits. So because of that, we should probably plan something that's pretty significant. And how much? Well, let's start with 15 and see what that requires. Well, ultimately 15 plastic bars. And it does require a lot of glass as an input. And we probably want to make a new glass setup for this, but for now, we could just take it from the old one. I doubt we're going to need this very quickly right now. And it does require the hydrogen to be cooled, but because it's a circular process, we can just do this locally. And that's basically the setup. Oh hey, the coal ran out. Goodbye to one more giant belt. These ruby rods must be made in an assembler. Hopefully the one will be enough for this. So there we go, making the rods, which means we can now request them and start making machines. Oh wow, we're finally caught up with all that junk. Which means I think we're in the last part of the factory as far as paving is concerned. Okay, to make these we'll need to be somewhere near plastic and somewhere near glass. Glass is up there and plastic is here, so we could kind of do it anywhere. So hopefully these can all just feed into each other since it's just borrowing it, although I suppose we could put buffer tanks between each one of these to be super sure that it does. But it's going to be kind of a long centipede here of stuff going through, but we don't want to fill each one of these pipes up because each pipe needs to have space inside of it for the output of one and the input of the next. So I'm not sure if this is actually going to work. It might be kind of janky, especially if certain machines run more than others, but I think it will work overall. But we won't know until we try. So all of this will run to make it liquid. It'll be a big circle. We will need to deliver it here, as well as the helium, which will also be a big circle. So let's use some buffer tanks for that. And how about some pumps to get it half full? And it might take a little while, but we'll have the heat exchanger just right there, sending it in. So there goes the helium. There goes the nitrogen. The nitrogen is easy enough. Get it to halfway and stop. Let's see what happens with the helium. So yeah, it does not go through all of the machines. So there's going to be a centipede going on here. We'll see if it works. Not sure about that. Although I also didn't do any provisions for actually getting the plastic in there. Luckily though, the inserters will reach. Well, I suppose before we do anything we should test the centipede. At least going slowly. Well, it's working so far. And all of the nitrogen is getting cooled, but we need to put modules in there. And now it needs the glass. This does need to do a side switch at some point after this machine right here. Or you could just make it red and not worry about it. That's probably the ideal solution. Although I really like to see the belts full. Well, it's working. But not full belts is a problem. Do output on the right. Put a short one in there. And that should switch the sides. So there we go, making nanoglass. It's not really running very fast, but the centipede seems to be working, which means we can now start making these canisters. And we don't really need a ton of them, so we might be able to just make them by hand. I guess it depends on how big these things stack. Units of 10. Yeah, they're pretty easy to make. Let's go with making 50 of them for now. And well, out of that sour gas again. We might need to come down here after all. But we're kind of just making a bunch of rockets, so eventually we're going to be filled up with them. Well, we are going to need our high-octane fuel for the purposes of our vehicles. So one other condition that would cause this to run is simply the high-octane fuel is low. So if it's below 5,000, send to green, and it's getting it. So we'll hook it up and start making it. That won't run for very long, but this is only a backup method here just to make sure we've got some, because now we need to hook it up to our trains, and it goes all over the place. Now it's on every train, but now we need to set this to the canisters instead. Takes quite a while to fill that up. Well, let's see how fast this thing goes when it loads up the high octane fuel. So we gotta wait for a second for it to clear the old canister out. And there it goes. And suddenly it's much faster. Whew. really gets going. A big difference is that it actually reaches its top speed relatively quickly. And the trains will have these empty barrels kind of stuck in them, and we can clear them out over time. Well, one other thing we can upgrade are the airships. It's not going to make too much a difference for them, because they don't really have any acceleration, but it will make them 5% faster. So that's probably worth it. This is going to be requesting empty barrels, sure, and canisters, sure. And we've got 3 airships, so that means we'd probably want to have a total of 120 canisters. The airships really don't need that much fuel, but they do have 3 stacks of them. Want to make sure each one of these airships is completely filled up. They will never run out of fuel. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to upgrade our factory with the better machines that we have, such as making more glass and green circuits. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.